Next up, we have his 1973's Hanzo The Razor, The Snare, which is a direct follow-up from the first film. Basically, the second film, I think, is great. I think it's the best of the trilogy. I think most people would agree upon that, if I'm not mistaken. I think it has a higher budget, better quality in terms of storyline, script, an amazing account of kind of extras and kind of body count is a little more higher. Definitely kind of pays off some of the things that were hinted on in the first film, does even more in the second film. Definitely has his unique way of kind of extracting information. Also played into a more higher effect this time around with more victims that it extracts information from in the second film, and also just a much more rounded, much more confident film, where the first film was trying to figure itself out and relatively well paced and just trying to understand what it wants to do, what it doesn't want to do, and with its violence, within its exploitation stuff. This film is super confident, has a really unique story. I actually would own the second film individually by itself compared to the other two. I just think it's a really well-rounded film completely in terms of the directing style, the storyline. I think is actually quite interesting, quite unique, and I actually think the more raunchy exploitation side of it is also improved, a lot more confident and a lot more funny and over the top alongside it as well. A lot more violent, higher body count alongside it as well, which I think is good. And again, adding on to the themes of this character, and he's very much anti-authority, anti kind of falling in line, doing what you're told, looking the other way. This character is all about justice, and he will get it by any means necessary. Keeping this review kind of short and sweet, my thoughts and opinions on it. The second film's kind of storyline, I think, is actually quite unique in terms of a treasury official, a lord, is basically cutting the value of the coin, the gold coin itself. Is basically cutting the mint, as it's called in the film, by half. He wants to basically make the value of this basically almost worthless. So basically the costings are going up for everyone. Everyone cannot afford basically to live or to have children, and that's a side storyline as well that starts off within a woman that's been found dead basically and had an abortion, and that leads into an investigation, or basically a series of women that are aborting their child before birth because they cannot afford to raise these kids, and the husbands are poor merchants, and the value of the coin is just not worth what it was, and the greedy corrupt officials are basically making the value of basically money almost like 0.5%, 50% worthless, essentially, more replacing gold by more lead, and basically having all the profits and lining their pockets a lot more within the kind of the more higher up right tier kind of corrupt officials alongside it. Of course, Hanzo is having none of this and dives into a full-on investigation, leading into a series of deaths and some suspicious behavior, and again going up against the shogun's kind of generals and people that he really should be going up against, essentially, and butting heads with. I definitely would say Hanzo in this one is definitely a lot more appealing and definitely more righteous compared to some of the other characters in the film. Again, his methods and his kind of attitude is very much questionable constantly. He's definitely much a hard-ass detective that wants to get shit done, but I like his resolve. I like what he does in the film. Again, not the best tactics, I think, sometimes, or very, puts himself in situations which he shouldn't be in, but hey, infiltrating a temple by using a dead woman's coffin to infiltrate the grave and get in there, that's brilliant. And as the movie goes along, he uncovers a prostitution ring where basically women are being kind of lured into these kind of situations in terms of these really kind of hard-hitting kind of games with kind of rich kind of merchants and people that are basically selling these women through the kind of the high priestess, through some position of power, basically luring essentially virgins into this kind of situations and then selling them for high profit, all this going on to the kind of the lord itself, the kind of treasury lord. So basically everyone is making money off the suffering of the people, and Hanzo is getting really pissed off and really angry that basically the people that he's trying to help and uncover cannot afford babies, they cannot afford their own wage, afford of living, and resulting to starvation and death or stealing, and crime was basically getting rampant because of this. And he is being asked to maintain the law while other people are getting away with it, essentially. How can he maintain law and order if the higher up officials are causing that kind of detriment down the line, and he is just seeking for answers and justice alongside it, and using his kind of methods that were already established in the first film, but to a much higher degree this time around, not just within his torture room he does, but also within the violent samurai kind of, you know, battles he does, the booby trap house, which is also excellent, and paying off a few things that were teased and mentioned or shown once or twice in the first film, does even more in the second film. So the second one is the heightened version of what this first film was, more confident, a lot more comfortable in itself, and definitely being more of a man of the people, despite how much of a sociopath this character is and his actions he does. But he definitely does care about the local town people and the villagers, and he wants to make sure justice is served, and he will go up against anyone along the way. And he's been tasked during the film to go after a thief, which is also quite nasty and quite vicious and cruel, and, you know, various kind of other villains and sub characters that do come into the film, which I think is quite entertaining, quite fun alongside it. So yeah, second film I think is best of the trilogy. Very fun from start to finish. And last but not least, we have Hanzo the Razor, who's got the gold released in 1974. This is the final of the trilogy and the kind of the conclusion of the character itself. I don't think there's been any more adaptations apart from maybe the manga series, and basically going to stop the series dead in its tracks. I think a trilogy is appropriate enough for the material and for what the film's trying to go for. I think the second film is the heightened version, the kind of the peak of what the idea is and the character in that world. There's not much more you can really go for. That you can keep it fresh and entertaining unless you're doing something completely radically different, which is something that the Lone Wolf and Cub movies did extraordinarily well in terms of giving you the same type of film but also changing it up, having different kind of social situations but also different locations, and it's an ongoing story of him going from the journey to hell. But in this film, he's a detective in the same location, same town, and there's only so many times you can see the same type of tactics that you usually would use. There's only so many times you can see the same type of booby traps, all the same kind of supporting characters having the same kind of conversations or arguments alongside it. You know, by this point, it is quite stale. It is a bit kind of lesser as well in terms of the exploitation stuff, in terms of the violence. Definitely a lot more of a tamer film for the third entry compared to the first two, and it feels like a bit of a step backwards. It feels a lesser entry than the first one. The storyline itself and the way the film's made is not terrible, it's not bad, it's just kind of serviceable. It's just an okay film by the end. Another very similar kind of storyline yet again about the treasury and about the worth of money and gold, and how the kind of the treasury kind of guards and the people that are basically being asked to guard this are basically getting nothing, cannot afford kind of their own living and their own families, and, you know, basically going to be starved to death, and they're resulting to stealing. And, you know, you've got people basically begging for work and jobs, and you've got rich kind of lords and officials basically wanting, you know, famous kind of swords or spears, or they're wanting favors, they're wanting very specific things. Hey, you give me something, a treasure of your ancestry, and I'll give you a job looking after my horses. It's just lunacy. And Hanzo basically is hot on the trail again, basically calling out the lords and basically saying, you know, yeah, I've stopped a bunch of, you know, corrupt thieves essentially that are stealing from the kind of the treasury, but the reasons for the doing it is not of kind of malicious kind of, you know, intent. It's just, hey, they are desperate. They are to a point where they need to have more money because, again, everything gets, the costings get higher, the wages stay the same. And, you know, this kind of the idea of tradition versus the modern world. And, you know, there's a quote saying 250 years of kind of samurai life is basically one of service, and you have to kind of fall through in being a samurai. And, you know, that is not the case within that kind of time period, that time with everything going up and responsibilities and things are changing. And he is questioning that motivation, that kind of, you know, journey these characters go on through. The storyline, I think, is actually okay. It's nothing particularly that interesting. If I'm being honest, he has a friend who he hasn't seen in quite some time, which gets into a bit of hot water, has this kind of legendary spear and owes money to some corrupt officials. And, you know, again, he's trying to find out what's going on after his sudden death, and basically goes on a bit of investigation and journey. But it's just very kind of minuscule, it's very tame. It's not particularly that interesting. And I think the resolution stuff is fine. I think the conclusion stuff is fine, but it ends in a bit of a whimper than a bang, I would say, compared to what the second film had to offer, and basically stopped all sequels from its tracks from this point onwards, which I can completely agree and I think was the right decision. So that's been my thoughts and opinions on Hanzo the Razor. What are your thoughts, guys? Please comment down below. What is your favorite Japanese exploitation film? I'd love to know your thoughts and opinions. Which is your favorite out of the kind of the series of movies out there? There's quite a few that I've yet to see or not available on DVD or Blu-ray. What is the ones that I'm missing? Please comment down below. So meantime, guys, Amphlett Reviews, signing out.